Floor is yours. You're muted. Winnie, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Happy Wednesday, everyone. And welcome to the Office of Higher Education Public Engagement Call. My name is Winnie Sullivan, and I am the Deputy Commissioner at OHE. On behalf of Commissioner Olson and the entire senior leadership team, I would like to thank you all for joining us today. I know we all have a busy schedule, and just to carve out a little time for these important discussions are much appreciated. I also want to thank the entire public engagement team who continues to work diligently to ensure that these calls happen. OHE is committed to continuing these events throughout the year because we understand how critical it is to stay connected with the community and to hold space for dialogue in which we all are impacted by in some way. So it is our mission to engage with diverse communities to identify barriers in post-secondary education. We will work in collaboration with communities to provide equitable access to information and advice that lead to the pursuit of post-secondary education and/or training for all Minnesotans. So again, thank you for joining the call today. And before we get started, I just wanted to provide a statement from the Office of Higher Education on the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd. Just 1 year ago, George Floyd was fully human, was victim to a system that did not treat him as fully human. Yesterday serves as a marker in time for this horrific event. As communities all over the world acknowledge the impact of his life and its untimely ending, the Office of Higher Education would like to recognize George Floyd's humanity and the humanity of all those who have experienced trauma by those who perpetuate the marginalization of others. Let us all be mindful that words alone will not help us to resolve the enduring trauma of the systemic issues that plague our society. Standing by does not make you an ally. It is only a missed opportunity to set privilege aside for the sake of normalizing justice in systems that was created to be unjust. We all must commit to learning, reflecting, and challenging ourselves to stand against the injustices that we see and hear. So with that, I just wanted to highlight that OHE is deeply committed and invested in the ongoing efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion that's happening around the enterprise. Commissioner Olson and I, as well as members of our team, is actively engaged in the DEI work at the state level, enterprise level, and in our own agency. Commissioner Olson, as well as several other agency commissioners, are members of the One Minnesota Council on Inclusion and Equity, which is chaired by Chief Inclusion Officer Chris Taylor. This council seeks to advance equity and inclusion by eliminating disparities in the state of Minnesota and ensuring that all voices of people most impacted by disparities are incorporated into the process of government. The council was charged with developing enterprise-wide strategies to advance systemic change in state government operations. And just recently, I had the honor to join the State Action Team, and this is a subcommittee of the One Minnesota on Council, the Minnesota Council on Inclusion and Equity. And this subcommittee was just recently formed to bring together state leaders and our community partners to develop a declaration and action plan around racism as a public health crisis. And Marcio at OHE, who you will hear from shortly, is the agency's DEI liaison. And over the past few months, Marcio has been attending bi-weekly meetings with the Office of Inclusion and other state DEI liaisons to develop an equity plan for the enterprise. We will provide updates on the progression of these efforts at future public engagement calls. So today's topic is around campus climate and post-secondary enrollment option. And this is part 3 of a 4-part series. In this particular call, we will feature post-secondary advocates, students, and stakeholders to discuss the major point of consideration for students when making the decision to continue their education post-high school. Also on this call, there will be resources shared to assist in navigating certain aspects of post-secondary education. And our moderator today is our very own Marcio Thompson, the External Relations Manager for our Gear Up, Get Ready program. And Marcio, I'll just turn it over to you.
Hey, thanks a lot, Winnie, and appreciate you for joining us and opening the call for us, taking the time out of your schedule to do that as well. As Winnie said, today's call is around campus climate and post-secondary enrollment options. Our featured guests who will be providing information and guidance around these issues today are Dr. Alex Hermeda, and Dr. Hermeda is a senior research analyst at the Office of Higher Education. And you will also hear from Zeke Jackson. Zeke is the executive director for People for PSEO, which is post-secondary enrollment options, and he's also a current student at the University of Minnesota. Before we jump right into the discussion, I just want to kind of set the stage by defining what we mean by campus climate and also what post-secondary enrollment options is for those of you on the call that may not know. So when we talk about campus climate, we're talking about, we define campus climate as the current attitude, behavior, and standards of faculty, staff, administrators, and students concerning the level of respect for individuals' needs, abilities, and potential. On today's call, you'll hear research about sense of belonging, which is impacted by campus climate, and Dr. Amana will be giving you that information. When we're talking about post-secondary enrollment options, you'll hear it referred to as PSEO. And so post-secondary enrollment options is a state-funded program which enables 10th, 11th, and 12th grade students to earn college credit through full-time or part-time enrollment at a Minnesota post-secondary institution while they're in high school. So to set the stage, you have those two definitions. And so throughout the call, when we're talking about these two issues or these two items, they'll be from that frame. The first presenter today is going to be Dr. Almeida, and I'm going to give you presentation capabilities, Alex, and you can go ahead and start with your presentation now. So the floor is yours, Alex. Thanks. Alex, if you're talking, I think you're muted.
You hear me now? Okay, apologies for that. Let's try this again. Is everyone able to see my screen? Thumbs up? Perfect. So good morning, everyone. My name is Alex Hermida. I am a research analyst at the Minnesota Office of Higher Education, and I'm going to talk a little bit about sense of belonging, and what I'll try to do is make the connection to campus climate, and I want to start off by saying that I'm not a campus climate expert. My dissertation research was on sense of belonging, and campus climate and sense of belonging are directly related to each other. And so I'm going to share with you what I've learned. And of course, at the end of this presentation, I welcome any questions. But I want to start off by saying that I'm by no means an expert. So my particular research that, and perhaps the reason why I was asked to be in this call. So my work, which I published in 2017, is called Everyday Oppression: The Challenges of Belonging for Underrepresented Doctoral Students at a Predominantly White Institution. Now, I did focus primarily on doctoral students, but there isn't a lot of literature about doctoral students. So most of my work was actually on undergraduates and then making those connections to doctoral students. But everything that I'm going to talk to you about today, I think really applies to undergraduates in general. One of the things that I like to start with, because I think it's really important, is I want to ask everyone to just take a quick minute to think about a time when you felt like you truly belong. So in a few words, just in your own mind, or if you have a piece of paper, kind of describe what made you feel like you belong. I'm just going to take like 30 seconds and give you an opportunity to think about that. So I hope you had a chance to think about this, and then I'm going to ask you a second question again. This time I want you to think about it, and if you have a piece of paper, write it down. Think about a time when you felt like you didn't belong, and what made you feel like you did not belong. I'm going to give you just kind of 30 seconds to quickly think about that. So as I invite you to finish thinking about it, one of the things that I want to say about these two questions is that often when I would talk to students and I would ask these two questions, and when I've asked these questions, these particular questions, not just of students but of people in general, I've always found that it was very easy for people of color and indigenous folks to think about that second question much quicker. That is, they were able to tell me and think of examples of places and times when they didn't belong much faster than times when they did belong. And I've found the opposite of those who identify as white. They they generally can speak to all these instances when they belong, and they have a harder time thinking about when they don't belong. And so I ask people to think about the implications of that. So um, as I move on, let's keep that in mind. But I want to, let's see. I want to first define sense of belonging, and sense of belonging is defined as a basic human need and motivation sufficient to influence behavior. In terms of college, sense of belonging refers to a student's perceived social support on campus, a feeling or sensation of connectedness, the experience of mattering, and feeling that they're cared about, accepted, respected, valued by, and important to the group or the campus community and others on campus. It is a cognitive evaluation of what that typically leads to an effective response of behavior. This was a definition by Strayhorn, who does a lot of work in the area of sense of belonging, and I think it perfectly surmises what the sense of belonging experience is for students on campus. Now, why am I talking about sense of belonging when we're discussing campus climate? And I think one of the things when I did my work and I did when I reviewed the literature, it really it came down to when students succeed when they feel like they belong, and experiences of belonging are really primarily impacted by three things. That's identity, and identity means different things to different people, but essentially how you're able to feel about yourself, how you're able to express yourself, how you feel you have either acculturated or assimilated to a particular culture really speaks to your identity. And then being able to have positive socialization experiences and then campus climate experiences. And so when all these three things are put together, when you have positive experiences, you have a positive identity, you have positive socialization experiences, and you have positive campus climate experiences, you tend to have a higher sense of belonging. And then the opposite is true. When you tend to have negative experiences, we go into a section called internalized oppression, and that internalized oppression leads to a low sense of belonging. And when we have a low sense of belonging, that's when we start to see students not succeed in education. There's higher levels of attrition, people leaving school. So in regards to campus climate, and I think Marcia's definition early on was spot on. I'm bringing a few more examples of definitions from literature here. But essentially, campus climate is programs and activities that in some affect students' progress towards degree completion. And it encompasses physical space, it encompasses human characteristics such as culture and identity, and organizational and institutional factors. And often when in the literature, when we talk about campus climate, we talk about a warm or chilly climate. Warm meaning it's positive, chilly meaning that you're having negative experiences throughout. So some examples of how campus climate has been studied in the literature. A survey of undergraduate students across 116 predominantly white institutions found that African American students were more likely to perceive higher levels of racial tension and lower levels of institutional commitment to diversity. And then on the opposite end, white students were less likely to perceive their campus as having racial tensions, and many students believed that racism was no longer a problem in society. Another example from the literature, a study of over 15,000 students, both at the undergraduate and graduate level, found that 33% of students of color had personally experienced harassment on campus compared to 22% of white students. And a significant proportion of students of color perceive their campus climate as being racist, hostile, and disrespectful. White students perceive their campus climate as non-racist, friendly, and respectful. And much of the literature talks about a chilly campus climate for students of color and indigenous folks. BIPOC students may have difficulties adjusting to climates where they perceive that white students think most BIPOC students are admitted by some other means other than merit. Experiences with subtle, stunning, and often automatic and nonverbal exchanges, which are put downs by white students towards BIPOC students, which we refer to as microaggressions. You see a lot of literature also on imposter syndrome, feeling like you don't belong in higher education as a person of color. And then a part that I think is incredibly important, and it's advising, mentoring, and peer relationships, or the lack of those. And there's a lot of literature that speaks to, when students, specifically students of color, are able to see faculty that look like them, staff that look like them, and other peers that look like them, they can form those relationships, and those relationships have a lot of influence on they're able to succeed in higher education. And succeeding in higher education is not just about the grades or the GPA. It's about having good mental health, being able to successfully navigate the ins and outs of being a college student, and all the other things that are influential. And I really like one of the critiques is that people say, well, there's white faculty, white mentors can also have these relationships with students of color, but as one scholar put it, many white professors and white staff lack the critical cultural consciousness to be able to really have deep bonding relationships with students of color and indigenous students, and in part because they don't have the same lived experiences, right? They don't understand I mean, it's one thing to read about it and to have empathy and all these things, but unless you live some of those experiences, it's really hard to relate. So let me talk a little bit about what I found in my own work. So what I did was I did a study in a predominantly white institution where um, I had a mixed method approach to my research, meaning I did a survey and collected answers from students, and then I also interviewed students one on one. I did um, about 15 interviews or so. Um, so some of the findings, and this is from the quantitative side, and I don't think this is going to be really groundbreaking to anyone, but a student's racial identity is so strongly associated with the perception of sense of belonging. White students reported high levels of sense of belonging compared to BIPOC students, and African American, Latinx, and Asian American students perceive experiences of sense of belonging at lower rates than white students. One of the issues I had when I did my research is that there weren't that many indigenous students in this particular school at this particular level. So I think I had maybe 4 indigenous students reply to the surveys, which meant that I had to exclude them as a population because the numbers were too small. We couldn't really generalize anything from 4 people about a larger the larger group. Um, and then socialization on camp and campus climate were both predictors of sense of belonging. And I think you know, I can definitely talk to people afterwards about the details of all of this, but I did, you know, regression analysis and t-tests and all these kinds of tests with the answers that students gave me, and I was able to predict that both socialization and campus climate working separate and together really impact sense of belonging. And again, when people feel like they belong, they tend to stay in school, and attrition levels go down. But I think the richest part of my particular study on belonging was really when I sat with students and was able to talk to them and interview them about their experiences. And it was one of the things that I found that was overwhelming across all students really was this idea of internalized oppression. And what I mean when I say internalized oppression is they're essentially taking all these negative things from the environment, from the different power structures that they're facing, and then they're internalizing all of this. And the internalizing is comes out in the ways I have here. One of them is self-blaming. They blame themselves for things that have happened to them. So, you know, if someone is just, you know, something racist or someone is rude to them, they take ownership over that. They're like, oh, maybe, you know, I shouldn't have been there, or, you know, it was my fault for this or that. Um, Another way is avoidance. Students would say, you know, I have no time for this. I have no time for racism, which is I think a fair thing to do, but essentially by not talking about it, by not dealing with it, you're avoiding and you're internalizing a lot of these things that are happening. um, the managing personal identity, what I mean by that is I heard from students say you know, there's certain places where I can't show my full blackness, or I can't be fully Latinx. You know, I had kind of have to be somewhere in between, because if I make people uncomfortable, then I'm more likely to feel this or get these kinds of responses. So it was really about managing how they showed up in the world, and I think that's a really critical piece, because imagine the taxing effects that has on you when you have to constantly manage your identity depending on the space and when you're at. And people really spoke to sometimes being able to find places where they can be their full selves, you know, when they can be show their full identity and show up as themselves. But those spaces were getting smaller and smaller, and at this time, this particular university was actually getting rid of a lot of those spaces where students felt comfortable. And so that has a damaging effect for students. Feeling like an imposter came up. feeling like, oh, maybe I just don't belong here. Maybe, this isn't the place for me. I don't know why they let me in here, and it was quite interesting because a lot of these things that people were saying were things that I had, at some point, had thought about myself, and so I really saw myself in some of these answers that people were giving me to my questions. And then lastly, making sense of microaggressions. One of the things that I saw often was how people dealt with microaggressions in part of their everyday struggle of being a student. Especially something that came up was the micro invalidations that people got all the time. And what I mean by invalidations, I mean people would refer to students as like, oh, I can't believe, I can't believe you got into this school, or I can't believe, are you a master student? And knowing fully well that this was a space for doctoral students. And so, like, how students had to deal with these microaggressions all the time, and then their process of trying to make sense of that, like, oh, I realized that someone said this negative thing to me, but I think part of it was because maybe I wasn't dressed the way I was supposed to be, or whatever it may be. And this was essentially a process of them trying to um, kind of internalize what people were saying, these oppressive things, and at the same time kind of fit into the world that they were in. Um, let's see. And essentially, one of the things that I learned by doing this work is that white students, essentially, when you're a white student, the K-12 education system, it's made to be a place that is comfortable for you in a lot of ways. And I think when students go into uh, uh, to a post-secondary institution that is predominantly white, which most schools are, they essentially are going into a place that's much like themselves, much like they know. And so it's not hard to imagine why students have, an easier time um, fitting into campus and feeling like they belong, not finding the campus climate as oppressive, or feeling that, like, they can socialize with other folks quite well. And then I feel like it's the opposite for students of color generally, is that they're coming from a system that really essentially wasn't made for them, and now they go into a higher education system that is at predominantly white institutions that's definitely not like them. And so they're constantly having to change some part of themselves to be able to fit in, change some kind of part of themselves to deal with the oppression that they're receiving. And this was just an ongoing battle. And this is why when we have discussions about campus climate, I mean, there's different conversations that we can have about, why students don't make it into higher education, and all those are valid. And then there's a second set of questions that we need to ask about, what happens when the students are there? Because I think a lot of times, especially around this campus climate issue, what happens is that we think, well, they made it in, so we're okay. We need to stop worrying about it. And essentially, what I'm trying to say is, no, this is when we need to spend a lot more time with working with students to make sure that they have a positive outcome, and they can feel like they belong. I'm gonna stop here, and I can um, definitely take questions of folks, or any, I can clarify anything um, if I need to. But essentially, that was my work on sense of belonging.
Hey, thanks, Alex, for presenting that very insightful information around sense of belonging. Um, I'm sure that the attendees got a lot out of that. That was really eye-opening. I just want to let you know that it's the first time that I've seen that. So, but I can identify with with it in many ways, with a lot of things that you expounded on. So the next voice everyone will hear. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat, and then we'll get them to Alex, and then we can have Alex answer those questions at the end. But for the sake of time, we're going to move on to our next presenter, Zeke Jackson, who is the Executive Director of People for PSEO. Zeke, the floor is yours. I'll let you share your screen as well.
Thank you so much. I just want to start by thanking Alex. That's really important research, and I hope that you and others continue to elaborate and communicate that information so that both educators as well as students like myself have a better understanding of what our peers are going through. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. All right, can I get some thumbs up? Y'all see this? Perfect. Okay. And okay, so hi y'all, my name is Zeke Jackson. I am a PSEO alumni. I did 2 years of PSEO at the University of Minnesota, and I'm currently still a student at the University of Minnesota. I'm 20 years old and the executive director of People for PSEO. People for PSEO is a nonprofit organization. We started in 2018 while I was a junior in high school. And we promote the use of the PSEO program as a means of breaking cycles of poverty, closing education disparity gaps, and reducing student debt or the cost of college just in general for students in Minnesota. And we do that by informing communities about the value of the PSEO program, lowering various barriers to accessing the PSEO program, and ensuring that once students have learned about the program, are able to access the program, that they actually, enter and succeed and reach their various objectives that they might have set for themselves through, while they're in the PSEO program. In the picture there, you can see our board president and vice president, Aaliyah Hodgen and Brooke LaFleur, speaking at the Capitol about PSEO. So I just want to, cover our bases, start off with some of the more fundamental pieces of, what is PSEO. It was a program started in 1985 under Governor Rudy Perpich, and that allows 10th, 11th, and 12th grade students to enroll directly into a college or university and take classes through their campus. So for example, when I was in PSEO, if I were to, I took an English class at the University of Minnesota. It was a 4-credit English class. And so by completing that class, I got 4 college credits at the University of Minnesota. And I also got 2 English credits for my high school. You just split it in half, at least for high schools with a semester academic calendar like my own. And so one of the cool things about PSEO actually is that you can take, one class for a subject through PSEO, and that covers a whole year's worth of the subject at the high school. So I was able to take a lot of other classes, a larger variety of classes than I would have been able to take in high school. The program is completely free. Next slide, we'll talk about, exactly how it's funded, but it doesn't cost the student or the family anything except for transportation. It's free tuition, free books, and any other class materials that the student might need. So even for like a pottery class, the PSEO program will cover the cost of getting clay, for example. Students can participate in the PSEO program as a full-time student. You can do it, students can do it part-time. They could take all their classes at the high school and then maybe one single class at the local community college, for example. And students can enroll in the PSEO program in person and actually go to the college campus and sit in the classrooms alongside all the other college students, or they can take the online classes as well. High schools must provide PSEO students access to the school building and school technology. So this is one way that low-income students can access the PSEO program by, maybe even if it's full-time or just part-time, going up to the computer library, for example, and using the computers to take their PSEO classes. Some PSEO students have even been able to earn their AA degree before receiving their high school diploma. My reason for pointing that out is just to show that you can earn a lot of credits through PSEO, especially if you take the time before you enter to really understand what classes you want to take and how those are going to fulfill your high school graduation requirements. Personally, I earned 57 college credits before I even graduated from high school, so it saved me a lot of time and money. Another big thing that I want to emphasize for everybody here is that there are transportation funds that are available for low-income students. More information about that can be found on the MDE website or by reaching out to me. I can share that information as well. I'd say that overall, actually, I'll get into that piece later. First, I want to talk about the funding. So the first step in the overall process of the funding model is a post-secondary institution has to actually accept the student. The decision on where a student does PSEO and whether they even can do PSEO isn't left up to the high school or the parents or anything like that. It's up to the individual post-secondary institution, and each college or university sets their own admission standards for enrolling in the PSEO program there. After the student is accepted into the PSEO program, wherever they're going, the state per pupil funding follows that student to the college or university, and the high school ends up keeping at minimum 12% of the funds that they would otherwise have. And it's higher than that 12% if the student is either staying in the high school or isn't, is only a part-time student. The really unique thing about the PSEO program, I think, is that it allows students to take these college level courses while they're still while still having access to high school environment and academic support resources from the high school as well. So PSEO is really amazing at closing education disparity gaps. So this is the 4-year high school graduation rates. This is data from the Department of Education for the high school class of 2019, which is actually my class. And you can see here that students, for American Indian or Alaska Native students, the baseline 4-year high school graduation rate was almost 51%. For the students who took at least one PSEO or concurrent enrollment course, almost 92% of them graduated. Same story, same trends for Black students. Regardless of the socioeconomic background, we see increases in high school graduation rates just by taking a single class, PSEO. And not only are students more likely to graduate from high school if they enroll in PSEO, but they're also more likely to enter and complete a post-secondary education as well. So you can see here, again, I'll point out the American Indian or Alaska Native statistics. 28% of them are completing college within the 4 years. And if they had taken at least one PSEO course while they were in high school, that jumps to 54.5%. And again, that trend continues for all students, regardless of their socioeconomic background. And this data is from the Department of Education. I think that one of my main goals here, is to kind of challenge maybe some of the audience's ideas of who should really be going into the PSEO program. The reason that we see those, research and student testimonies show that the reasons we see, these improvements in graduation rates is because it's building academic momentum. Students are getting these or developing the skills that they need to succeed in a post-secondary education, and they're getting the self-confidence as well. And students enroll in PSU for a lot of different reasons. It's not just these, the quote unquote cream of the crop students with the best GPA. Students enroll in PSEO because they want to save money on college. They do it because, I've met low income students who say they wanted to do PSEO so that they had a more flexible school schedule. They could work more hours at their job and support their family. Some students just don't like sitting in a high school classroom all day. And so PSEO is a way for them to get out of a learning format that doesn't necessarily work really well for them. The homeschool community makes great use out of the PSEO program. And for some students, perhaps they've exhausted their course options at their high school, or I'm from Little Falls, Minnesota, so a pretty rural school. We just didn't have a lot of college, we didn't have any AP classes And we had very limited selection of college in the schools classes. So for me, it was also an option and also a way to get college credit for classes that just weren't available to me. And so especially for, one of the big things that we advocate for is that there are a lot of different reasons that students want to enroll in the PSEO program. And so one of the things I really want to challenge, especially like counselors and educators at post-secondary institutions to think about is expanding and thinking about what kinds of students are you channeling into the PSEO program, what kind of students are you accepting, because students get value out of PSEO for a lot of different reasons, and GPA, for example, isn't necessarily the best way to measure whether the student will be successful in PSEO. Despite the various benefits that I just shared, there are a lot of barriers to participation in the PSEO program. So there was a study done in early 2020 that showed that 92 out of 95 school district websites had missing information about PSEO. And it's actually part of state law that high schools have that up-to-date information on their website. Schools just don't consistently encourage participation in the PSEO program. Some schools are really awesome about it, don't get me wrong, but sometimes that comes from, I shared the funding model earlier. There's often a tension between high schools and that funding formula, because they're losing money every time a student does PSEO. Eligibility standards at many colleges sometimes disqualify students from doing PSEO, even if it's the best option for them. Transportation, there's a lot of pieces of PSEO law that need to be updated. For example, the transportation reimbursement rate is at 15 cents per mile for students at or below the federal poverty line. And that hasn't been updated since 1985 when the program was first created. So that's something we're working on as well. Food insecurity for PSEO students is a big one. If you are a low-income PSEO student, you're getting these free or reduced lunches at your high school every day, and suddenly you're going to a college campus. And oftentimes, a lot of PSEO students, myself included, we would go in the early morning and we'd be there till the evening. So I actually had to cover 3 meals for myself. I'd pack a lunch, and then sometimes I'd have to buy food, or maybe I'd have to pack 2 lunches and have like a soggy peanut butter and jelly sandwich for dinner, that sort of thing. That's a real challenge that a lot of students face. And another one is just a lack of peer and social support networks on campus. If they don't know a lot of other students there, a lot of post-secondary institutions don't have really formal or rigorous orientation processes to just PSEO students to post-secondary environment. And so these are all barriers that prevent students from either learning about PSEO, enrolling in PSEO, or succeeding in PSEO. So overall, there's a lot of different things that can, there's a lot of different ways that the PSEO experience overall can be improved for students. I wanted to touch on a little bit about how PSEO saves money for students. There was a study done in late 2020. This came out in December 2020 that found that every year PSEO students across the state are saving $60 million in college costs. So we have a couple quotes here from a student who got 58 college credits, a student who got their AA degree, before they graduated. And yeah, so I just wanted to kind of loop back again to the beginning of who People for PSEO and what we're trying to do. So there are 3 basically big unmet needs in the PSEO community that we're seeing. And so when we see that high schools aren't consistently encouraging enrollment in the PSEO program, there's a piece of state law that prohibits post-secondary institutions from sharing the financial benefits of the PSEO program. Communication overall is just a barrier that, a lot of students aren't even learning about PSEO. So we try and fix that by doing presentations like the one I'm doing right now. We will write newspaper articles about our experiences. We share information on our social media. We put flyers up around towns, do tabling events, stuff like that, to just help students and families understand what PSEO is in the first place. There are high barriers to entry in the PSEO program. especially for low-income students like I've shared. So what we do to try and change that is by engaging in research and advocacy and working with high schools to change the PSEO policies. We study the impact that PSEO has on students. And then we also work with lawmakers to suggest changes to PSEO law that that we think should be made to make the program more accessible. And to help students who don't really have that support network, a lot of PSEO students, and this was definitely my experience as well, is a lot of us are kind of in this really weird gray area where we're not going to our high school super often. We don't see our friends every day, but also this college environment is really new to us. We don't really feel like we fit in either space. And so in order to combat that, what we're trying to do is actually build PSEO communities. We want there to be a PSEO club at every college and university in the state so that students are able to create those mentoring and peer relationships. They're able to learn about and access all the different academic support resources that are now available to them, being in a college environment. And also, it's really important that students just have fun with each other and that it's an overall good experience for them. So yeah, if you want to get involved with our mission or you want to talk to me about how to create a PSEO club at your local post-secondary institution, or you want to talk more about how your high school is getting students into the PSEO program or learning about the PSEO program, you can reach me at zeke.jackson@peopleforpseo.org. I'm not entirely sure how WebEx works, but I'm sure I can also throw my email into the chat for y'all as well. So thank you. Marcio, I still think you're looks like you're still muted there. I can't still hear you. So I see a question in the chat here. Who accepts a student into the PSEO program? High school counselors? No, so each college or university in the state sets their own PSEO admission standards. And a student will apply, and if they're accepted, then they're accepted. High school counselors, they don't have any sort of control, or really are part of the process at all, except for to inform the student about their academic options, of course.
Can you hear me now?
There we go. Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, good. All right. Sorry about that. Thanks for answering that question. That was one that came through in the chat. I think we're getting another one in the chat for you as well, Zeke. It's asking about admission standards, and you may not know this, but you might. They're asking, are admission standards similar to the admission standards for traditional incoming freshmen, or are the PSEO candidates treated differently?
That's an interesting question. So I'd say it varies. It depends. a lot of, for example, the min-state colleges and universities, so you need to have like at least a 3.0 to apply to PSEO. If you're a senior, for a junior, it's like a 3.5 GPA or higher. But then there are universities like the U of M, for example, have a really high, like I think their average GPA, and this is on their website, is like a 3.9-ish, which, as far as I know, is actually a higher standard than for their undergraduate applicants. So it definitely varies. I really encourage, if you have questions about like specific post-secondary institutions, every college and university has a website about their PSEO programs, so their admission standards can be found on there. Overall, though, I guess I would answer, I'd say they're approximately the same for a lot of institutions across the state.
Okay. I have another question for you. It says, what should parents do if the school doesn't think PSEO is a good option for their student? Like, is there someone they can advocate with, or?
Yeah, so my answer to that is like I'd be willing to work with you on that. If I mean ultimately, if you and your student thinks that the PSEO program is the best option for you, but your counselor's advising against it, like that that doesn't mean you can't do it, right? So I'd say reach out to me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have, or help you work through any other factors or things you should be thinking about as you're making this decision. But yeah, I don't know. Sorry. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Another person was asking about the GPA, kind of the question that you answered previously. So I guess a follow up to that. So they're asking about students who have lower GPAs, or yeah, so lower GPA. But is that going to be, that's going to be a kind of an admissions question. So kind of based on the school and their admissions criteria.
hmm And I will also say that a lot of post-secondary institutions are flexible about that. So if your student's GPA is lower than what the admission standard is, I encourage you to reach out and ask anyway. Maybe your student has particularly good grades in like English or math or like science classes. And I've heard about students, be able to access PSEO by starting off with maybe one class in an area that they've already demonstrated they can do well in. And if they continue to do well once they started PSEO, perhaps you can do more after that. So I I do encourage you to advocate for yourself as well throughout that process.
Zeke, you're getting a lot of questions. Next question here asks, how many classes are 10th graders allowed to take per semester?
Thank you for that's an important question that I didn't cover in this presentation. So 10th grade students, so I mentioned 10th, 11th, and 12th grade students can do PSEO. There are unique requirements on 10th grade students. If a student is in 10th grade and doing PSEO, their first semester, you can only take one class your first semester, and it has to be a career and technical education course. So that's more commonly found at like community colleges and technical colleges rather than four-year institutions. But that can be basic intro to business or writing classes. A lot of them are things like welding classes, automotive classes, stuff like that. So there are additional requirements there, and if your student does well their first semester in 10th grade, then they can take additional classes after that during their second semester. Yeah.
And a follow-up was was, when was 10th grade added as an eligible grade level to take part in PSEO?
It was relatively recently. I think it was, this is completely off the top of my head, but I think it was like 2012, 2000, it was sometime in like the early 2010s.
Okay. Another question here, how is People for PSEO educating families support structures about PSEO. And that being said, also sharing that their access to student data also is different than high school. So they're asking about the deal. So I'm not sure exactly if you could really get into that either, but how are you guys getting information out to students and families around PSEO?
Yeah, so I covered a little bit of that during the presentation, but I'd say our overall strategy has been to highlight student success stories and then also make sure that, for example, we over the last 5 months, we've held like 4 informational webinars that have attracted, pretty large audiences, and we have student panels of current PSEO students who will share their experiences, both the good parts and the bad parts, because or the challenging parts. It's really important to be covering all of those grounds. And I'd be happy to answer the second part of that once it's clarified, because I'm not sure either.
And we're fortunate to have one of our colleagues that works at Mid State on the call. She wants to clarify some information around the question regarding admission for high school students into PSEO programs with Mid State. Jessica, can you hear me?
I can. Hey,
Okay.
Zeke.
Hi, Jessica.
How you
Uh,
doing? You're
this
doing
is
well?
I'm
Jessica.
good.
I just want to welcome you to the call. Thanks so much, Jessica, for letting me know you were on the call and want to jump on and clarify some things around the admissions process. We really appreciate that. So, for those of you that are attending the call, this is Jessica Espinoza. She works with Penn State, and so she's going to provide some clarity around the admissions process. Thanks, Jessica.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Zeke does an amazing job, and he is very knowledgeable about all things PSEO. So I just will, if there's further clarifications I can provide, like specifically about Minnesota State, happy to do that. And he's right. We do have like system-wide kind of admissions criteria for PSEO, but there is a lot of flexibility for campuses. So he was totally right in that to look on their websites, to reach out to them specifically about your own unique circumstance. Sometimes, I mean, I always say this is just good college knowledge. You should always ask questions, even if what you read doesn't seem like it's going to work for you. It's always good to follow up because everybody's situation is different and unique sometimes. So he's absolutely right. We do have some different criteria that we wouldn't have for a student who was applying to a college, like after high school, for example. And that might include test scores, if you have them, ACT scores, NCA scores. It might include letters of recommendation from a counselor and other things. So it's always good to, if you're interested, to contact someone at the campus to find out about your specific eligibility. And then the only other thing I just wanted to add, because I think there was something about FERPA. So if I can help with anything with that question, I'm happy to try.
Yeah,
But I didn't hear
Jessica,
what the question was.
okay, I'll go back and read that. Just one moment. Let me find it here quickly.
Thanks so much for expanding on that, Jessica.
No, you got it all.
So the question is, so they're asking if, let's see, so also sharing. So it seems like they're asking if the access to student data is different from what parents would have access to in high school due to the FERPA.
Yes, and that is a good question. And it's kind of confusing because FERPA, for people who don't know, that's like the Privacy Act, the Federal Education Privacy Act that applies both to K-12 students and to higher ed students. And dual enrollment students or PSEO students are, both. So it gets kind of confusing about which FERPA rules apply. Um, and basically the way it works, at least in the Minnesota state system, is that the college can always communicate with the high school counselor or principal or teacher about how a student is doing, but they are not able to communicate directly with a parent, because in higher ed, that is a privacy right that you have, that you don't have in K-12. And so if the parents want to be in direct communication with the college about their son or daughter's participation in the program, the student has to sign a waiver to the FERPA rules about that to allow the college to communicate directly with the parent. And so that's different at the high school. The parent and the counselor can talk about anything the student is doing. But it's just a little bit different once they're considered a post-secondary student. So that can cause some, frustrations if you don't understand that going into it. So that's an important thing to ask about as a parent or as a school official to make sure you understand how FERPA works in higher ed.
Thanks so much for that, Jessica. That really helped kind of clarify that. Um, the next question is, have private institutions, or if you know if private institutions have increased the number of classes they allow PSEO students to register for?
So I'd say overall, the general trend across the state, and of course you might find exceptions. The general trend is that private institutions don't allow PSEO students to take as many classes. So I know, for example, St. Thomas, McAllister, Carleton, they don't actually admit any. They don't let PSEO students do any classes through them. I think like St. Kate's, for example, you can only do 2 PSEO classes. Um, man, St. Olaf, I think you can only do 1 or 2 classes. I think that's the general trend. And I encourage those might not be exactly right, so I encourage you to look at those institutions' websites if you have specific questions about it. But I guess to answer the question originally, no, I don't think it really has changed. I think that's been the trend for a while now.
Hey Zeke, I have a question for you. Just kind of tie this to the information that Dr. Hermeda was speaking about sense of belonging. I heard you speak about wanting to coordinate some type of club or connection for all PSEO students who are attending classes on campus. You want to kind of expound on that? I think that really ties back to kind of what Alex was saying about his research and sense of belonging. Uh, so how did that come about, and why you guys think it's important?
Yeah, definitely. So when I was in the PSEO program, there were a lot of okay, so overall, when students are in the PSEO program, professors don't really know unless you tell them. Other college students don't really know that you're in the PSEO program unless you tell them. And even a lot of students, even if the student is young looking, people just assume that they're a young looking freshman. That's just kind of the general trend. I think a lot of students find though that it's really difficult to really immerse themselves in a college environment because they're not living on campus with other students who they might be in classes with. They're not, it's not like they're going to college parties or anything like that. And so a lot of students just don't really feel fully immersed in the campus culture. But then at the same time, a lot of students feel somewhat excluded from their high school culture as well. Like for some students and like peer groups, the decision to do PSEO can harm friendships. I lost friends when I decided to do PSEO For a lot of students, it's almost like a loyalty thing where it's like, oh, they're doing PSEO, they're leaving the high school, like, you know, they think they're too good for us or something along those lines. And so I think creating spaces for PSEO students to form relationships with each other, to be mentored by older students who have gone through the program and know what it's like and have figured out how these transitions work is immensely beneficial to a lot of students. And so that's something we're trying to really spread all across the state so that students who are in the program are able to learn about their resources at their post-secondary institution. They're able to figure out that, hey, I have a bunch of my peers telling me it's really good to go to office hours. Maybe I'll try that out. Stuff like that. And so that's I think that's where a lot of it came from.
Thanks for that. Alex, do you think that maybe some of your research could be provided to show a basis for needing an avenue for this group of students so that they don't fall prey to some of the things that you have kind of kind of brought to our attention in your research?
You meaning for PSEO students in
Correct.
particular?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, excuse me. I think here's the thing. I think first of all, I just barely scratched the surface of my research, right? Like but you get the gist of it. Like students of color generally are gonna be in situations where they're gonna feel like they don't belong. And I think that's gonna be universal, whether the student's a PSEO student or an undergraduate student or a master's or a doctoral or professional student. It really doesn't matter. It's more about the place, the physical location, the overall experiences, the policies they go into, that are part of the school, the ethos of what it is to be educated in a particular place, right? And that is to say, a lot of my research was on predominantly white institutions, and so I think that those findings are probably pretty universal to those schools. But would a PSEO student experience that if they were going, for example, to the historical Black college or a Hispanic servant institution, if they identify to be Black or Latinx? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, I think there's other things that play into it, but I think the overall sense from my understanding of the literature is that when people are in places that are welcoming, that are create a warm climate for students, where students see other people that look like them, where curriculums reflect their personal identities and all these other things, I think students tend to do well and tend to feel like they're gonna belong. And I think that's pretty universal. And one of the things I've said many times is that higher education, we from the policy side, we tend to spend a lot of time on focusing on financial aid and resources and access to higher education. But I don't know that we spend as much on what happens when students are actually in higher education. This is across the board, and I think if higher education institutions made an effort to really create environments where all students can be successful, including students of color, that's going to trickle down to whether a student is a PSEO student or not. That's going to be universal.
Thank you, Alex. That's really good insight. I think we've probably heard those sentiments on the call before. Is um, providing programming or looking at your institution from the lens of those that you serve that have been marginalized or those that are considered the least of these gives you an opportunity to serve everyone better. And so I think that was well said by you and connecting your research to currently kind of the sentiment for those students who are who may be PSEO, who may be students of color. So we have to kind of continue to have these conversations to push institutions to understand that as part of who they are and the institution they've created for opportunities for students to come be educated in their on their campuses or in their environment, that an environment needs to be more welcoming. The environment needs to be more conducive to supporting those students. And not only that, but policies and curriculum also needs to be geared towards um, the diversity of the student population. So as we move forward, we'll make sure we continue to push that type of messaging out in our calls. Zeke, there was one other question for you. It was around the University of Minnesota. Oh, so speaking of the groups that you were talking about earlier, has there been any groups established at any of the other schools who offer PSEO courses to students? I think someone was specifically asking about the University of Minnesota, but I'd like to know if there are any at any of the schools that you know of.
Yeah, so the University of Minnesota actually has a really well-established PSEO group that has been around for a lot longer than People for PSEO has been around, actually.
Mhm.
Um, and I think, when I first enrolled in PSEO at the U, I wasn't really a part of the group. I didn't do very much with them, although I did know of them. And it wasn't really until I engaged a lot with them that I really started to feel more secure in my role as a PSEO student at the U. And so I think that's where a lot of the inspiration came from. So the U has a fantastic club. We are currently working with students at Anoka Ramsey Community College and Bemidji State University to build PSEO student clubs. This whole idea of really going after and creating clubs has been something that we've been working on since really February. And so with everything with COVID going on and with the semester, being halfway through the semester, we're still looking for students or waiting for fall to be working with more students to create more clubs. But hopefully by this time next year, we have quite a few student clubs that are starting up across the state.
Marcel, if I could just add a piece to what Zeke was saying. One of the things that I didn't mention that came across my research is that when students were able to find some sense of community, it really worked to mitigate a lot of the internalized oppression that they were facing, the microaggressions, et cetera. And essentially, that's what Zeke is speaking to when we talk about the PSEL clubs. That's just one form of community, right? And I think we've seen this in research at many different levels. When people are able to find communities of people that are like them or same interests, et cetera, it really works to increase people's socialization to campus, which helps the overall sense of campus climate and increases their sense of belonging. They're more likely to stay. So this is why I think it's really important for institutions to allow students to have that space, right? To have these clubs, to uh, have not only like physical space, but that the university is supporting this somehow, right? That and then and in the same regard, it's also quite detrimental to students when universities not only get rid of physical spaces, but put a lot of roadblocks for students to create these groups and have the meeting spaces or the opportunity to meet other students. So I think what Zeke is speaking to, I mean, it's all this all is part of the literature on campus climate and belonging.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Alex. As we look at kind of our public engagement path and the questions and topics that we bring to our attendees, we always want to look at it from the focus of those students who identify as BIPOC students. And when we're talking about the colleges and universities of Minnesota, we understand they are predominantly white institutions. So when we talk about establishing these spaces and pushing back or trying to find an opportunity to speak to power, to have them recognize that their institutions were created by those who are in the majority, and that there needs to be space provided by those who are traditionally unrepresented at those spaces, to have it be more welcoming, more inviting. Alex, I'd like to ask you, what are some things you think that we should do as the Office of Higher Education or as a community of those who believe that these institutions are not um, particularly built most optimally for students of color? What are some things that we could do, low hanging fruit, that we might be able to push the envelope on as a community of those who believe that they should be more suitable for students of color? What are some suggestions that you might give that maybe people for PSEO might take on, the Office of Higher Education might take on, and even some of our colleagues on the call might take on?
That's that's a really tough question to answer. I mean, there's a lot of things in my head. I don't know that they're all necessarily low-hanging fruit, but I mean, I think to the point that Zeke was making it with some of his slides, I think increasing access to a post-secondary education, I think it's always our priority, right? And I think Zeke was able to show clearly that PSEO can be a great avenue for students, right, to not only be introduced to higher education, but to potentially succeed in higher education. He demonstrated that PSEO students have higher graduation rates, and they have higher four-year graduation rates at post-secondary institutions. So, I mean, I think, like, why aren't we promoting PSEO? Why isn't that message going out there, especially among communities of color, right? Because I think, to Zeke's point earlier, like, it's a great way to really cut down the financial costs of higher education. Cost tends to come up quite a bit when you talk to communities of color in post-secondary education, right? Like, they either they feel like they can't afford it, or it's not for them. PSEO would be a natural way to, you could get an AA degree before even finishing high school. But I think not many students. I remember when I was in high school, I don't ever remember hearing about PSEO, and you know it wasn't that long ago. I mean, PSEO was around by that time. So we need to think a more inclusive approach, I think, to really get students into school and to reach out to those communities and make connections with programs that already exist, such as PSEO. But I think the other part too is thinking about what universities are doing to keep students once they're in there. And I think that question is really, it's really complicated, because it really, what you're asking is what are they doing beyond simply just getting students in the door, right? And a lot of, from my research and from what I read, and many things I've seen, schools do a really good job of talking about diversity and talking about equity, but do not so great of a job actually putting that into practice. Simply having a diversity office does not make you, doesn't mean that you're really increasing diversity, increasing equity, none of those things, right? It's really about, what are actually schools doing to keep students in. Are they hiring more faculty and staff of color? Are they creating spaces where students can thrive, BIPOC students can thrive? Are they investigating and auditing curriculums and practices that um, maybe disenfranchise students of color and indigenous students, right? Are they actually doing it? And then it gets really complicated, because people talk about academic freedom from faculty and doing all these things, but um, the wanting of for BIPOC students to succeed has to be a part of the everyday um, life of colleges and college administrators and faculty and staff, um, because I think it's really easier for them to talk about how, quote unquote, woke they are, and how, they really stand by students of color and stuff, but then in practice, that doesn't actually take place. And like you said, Marcio, we have in this state primarily white institutions. So to some degree, I mean, there's not a ton of incentive, I feel like, for them to change their practices. I know this is overgeneralizing, but it's hard. Change is hard, right? And what I'm asking is they have to do a drastic change of kind of doing a 180 and really investigating, what is it that we're doing? Why are we not recruiting more students of color? Why are they not succeeding? And I think what I find is that a lot of people have a way of talking about the deficit on students when we talk about this, right? Students weren't prepared. Students didn't have a good GPA. Students didn't have the social capacity to be, and in doing so, we take the onus away from the institution. We should really be asking, what is the institution doing, right? It should be on the institution's failure to not retain the students, not on the student. But often we really think about it from a deficit perspective, putting it all on the students, and I don't think that's fair. So I'm not sure that I really answered your question, but that's essentially my perspective on it.
No, I really like that. I think that's well said. That many times it is, the person who's being oppressed or being marginalized had the onus is put on that person to one speak up, two advocate for themselves, and three have the solution. And so, I believe what I hear you saying is that institutions need to be more proactive about those three things, and not be reactive in establishing a space um, for those who have been marginalized or kept out or uh, out of post-secondary education. So I appreciate that. And so nearing the end of our time with our attendees. And I want to just ask anyone in attendance if they have any more questions for our featured guests. Okay. So, well, if not, I'd just like to say thank you, Alex and Zeke, for joining us today. Very, very good information. I think it was a wealth of information that went forward. Jessica, thank you for stepping in to add some clarity around the student data issue. That was much appreciated. I'm sure that our attendees um, welcomed that information. I do want to let everyone on the call know that we do these calls monthly, and as the deputy commissioner said before, this is the third in an installment of 5 topics that we are doing around post-secondary education. So I appreciate you guys for joining us, and we want to give you a little bit of your time back. You'll be receiving an email with the next installment of this of our PE calls. Also, after you exit the call, you will receive a survey, and we ask you to complete the survey, give us your feedback so that we're able to improve upon the work that we do to bring information to you from our PE calls and our PE guests. So once again, I appreciate you all for your time and hope to see you on our next PE call. Thanks a lot.